Mystery surrounds a possible hijacking of 6 commercial ships sailing in the Gulf of Oman. The ships off the coast of the UAE broadcast warnings yesterday, nearly at the same exact time that they lost full control of their steering under rather unclear circumstances. But Iran is suspected by international authorities of being behind some kind of maritime hijacking incident. And now global diplomats calling for tougher action on Iran. With us now is Dr. Michael Oren, former Israeli ambassador to the U.S. Sir, Ambassador Erdan now says the UN must take action at this point. He is calling it a growing problem of Iranian terrorism on the seas. What are your thoughts on his comments and the steps perhaps the UN could take?
Well, it's actually a good grounds for making such a claim, Jeff. The fact that Iran has operated not just against Israeli interests, but against international interests, against these 6 ships. One of them apparently actually has been taken over by armed men and is steaming toward Iran. So there's certainly firm grounds for international action through the Security Council. For Israel, though, it's an interesting position. Israel has not in the past turned extensively to the UN and in requests for action against Iran. We didn't feel we had could get a very fair listening in the UN. What's interesting, Israel has always reserved the right to act unilaterally against Iran. And by going to the UN, on one hand, you may be gaining international legitimacy against Iran. On the other hand, you're giving up a certain amount of Israeli unilateral maneuverability. So it's a very interesting development from Israel's perspective.
I want to ask about Secretary of State Blinken's comments, and I'll quote him, that there will be a coordinated response to the suspected Iranian drone attack. I'm curious, in your mind, what a coordinated response could look like in reality, with the U.S. still trying to convince Iran to return to the JCPOA. I mean, doesn't that limit America's hands, and how would Israel feel about that?
It's good, and Israel, again, this is part of our strategy in moving toward international actions against Iran at a time when the Iranians are demanding that all sanctions be lifted against it before we renew the 2015 Iran nuclear deal. Here is the United States intimating that there could be additional sanctions put on Iran, not sanctions lifted. Now, from Israel's perspective, that is very good news. For those people who favor the JCPOA in the United States, that's bad news. Additional sanctions could be economic. They could impact the ability of Iran to trade internationally through the SWIFT system. But they could also be operative, Jeff. Going back to the 1980s, some of us may recall that President Reagan actually sent U.S. warships to escort Kuwaiti tankers through the Persian Gulf because they were being attacked by the Iranians. So you have the 6th and the 5th Fleet in those areas. That's the 2 of the largest naval forces in all human history. And they could easily escort some of these freighters. And should the Iranians try to attack them, then the United States would be in a position to strike back.
Do you think we're headed in that direction?
It could well do. Let's see what happens with this one freighter that has been taken over by armed men. If it is proven unequivocally that these were Iranian operatives, that this ship has been taken over from Iran, that's an act of international piracy, which under international law is an act of war.